My name is Aaron Liebman, and I'll be talking today about the best and easiest way, in my opinion, to lose excess body weight. This presentation is primarily geared towards individuals who hope to lose weight on their own, so I won't be looking at commercial programs such as Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, or Noom. I also won't be focusing on the new diet drugs that have come out recently. Instead, I'll discuss what I've learned about weight loss, much of which was new to me at the time and does not conform to the conventional wisdom. I'll examine what has worked and what has not worked for me, and to complete the picture, I'll discuss some of the difficulties as well as the unfortunate side effects of weight loss. I intend to dispel quite a few misconceptions and top it off with a fair amount of advice. Now, if none of this concerns you, because you feel you don't need to lose weight, before you click on something else to watch, let me just add a brief bit of advice. The best way to avoid being fat is unquestionably, hands down, not to become fat in the first place. Excess weight is easy come, hard to go. When I was young, even into my 20s and 30s, I was normal weight, so I didn't pay much attention to it. It took me a very long time before I even realized that I was very slowly gaining weight, even though the fact that I generally had to, occasionally I'd have to alter my wardrobe, should have given me a clue. By the time I realized that I was obese, it was a difficult uphill battle for me to lose weight. So if you're relatively young and you aren't overweight, please consider the importance of maintaining yourself at a healthy level before you get to a place where you desperately need to reduce, like I did. That's my message to thin people. So if you don't need to lose weight, goodbye, thank you. If you're a fatty, please stick around. Before I begin, I need to briefly address a few preliminary questions. First of all, why lose weight? Is it even necessary? Aren't there more important things to focus on, such as health and wellness? Well, as my first few sentences in this presentation suggested, I disagree. There is a strong correlation between excess weight and lack of general wellness. There are many, many maladies that are created by or exacerbated by excess body fat. This concern probably does not apply to many people who are only mildly overweight, nor to people who are heavy because they are exceedingly muscular. But it does apply to the vast majority of people who are obese. So if you carry around a fair amount of excess body fat, and yet you don't suffer from any adverse medical conditions attributed to it, you should consider yourself lucky. Or maybe you're just young, in which case, don't be certain that your luck will continue as you age. At the risk of body shaming, and regardless of what body type you or anyone else considers beautiful, it's important to understand that certain body types are healthier than others, and people should be aware of the dangers associated with excess weight. Needless to say, sorry, I missed a page. Obviously, this correlation is not absolute. I do not mean to suggest that all fat people are unwell and all thin people are fine. Far from it. But I do believe that the vast majority of seriously overweight people would be much healthier if they managed to lose much of their excess body fat. What I'm trying to say is that even though it's true that it's more important to be healthy than to be thin, I still believe that being relatively thin can, in most if not all cases, help a person stay healthy. There are many factors contributing to our health and wellness, and many of them are beyond our control. Excess weight is one of those factors contributing to health and wellness, and I believe it is within our control. So why not work at improving it? Which leads directly to the second question. Is it even possible to lose weight? Isn't our weight predetermined by our genetics? Isn't our body fat content a biological problem, not some sort of quote-unquote disease of willpower, and therefore something we have absolutely no control over? Hasn't modern science proven that, contrary to the science of previous generations, weight loss methods do not work, and we simply cannot will away the fat? There's an argument which I've started to hear only in the last few years, that there is no good weight loss strategy, or at least no long-term sustainable weight loss strategy to keep the weight off. While I respect this opinion, because it is voiced by actual scientists and people who follow them, and it's based on some real data. I don't agree with it. There is certainly some truth to it for several reasons. First of all, our predisposition toward weight gain is partly genetic. Two, most weight loss regimens are ineffective for most people. And three, when we do try to lose weight, our bodies seem to stubbornly resist our efforts. That is all true. And yet, I believe that this hopeless point of view is essentially wrong. Obesity can be overcome through proper nutritional and lifestyle techniques, and yes, quite a bit of willpower. The reason that willpower alone has not been successful is partly because our approach has been wrong, as I'll soon discuss, and also because there is just so much in our social milieu which is structured to our disadvantage if we're trying to lose weight. We're set up to fail, but it is doable. Again, I'm not saying that weight loss is easy, but I'm saying that with enough willpower and the right approach, it is an achievable goal. Obviously, this notion is going to form the core of the following presentation. Third question. Isn't weight loss something that is highly individual, and therefore different people will react differently to different weight loss programs? The answer is yes, probably, at least to some extent. And I'd like to refer to an interesting TED Talk by Eran Segal entitled, "What is the Best Diet for Humans?" available on YouTube. And yet, I still believe that we humans share enough genetic material that I can say with some degree of confidence that the techniques that worked for me will probably also work for you. Needless to say, I cannot guarantee results. I've tried these techniques only on myself, so they might not work on others. And even though there is very little that I'm going to say which is entirely original, the experts that I do rely on are in some cases controversial themselves. And even I am skeptical of what they have to say in some cases. The upshot is that I will be presenting what I believe is good for almost everyone, but you might do well to keep in mind that I could be wrong. A few words of warning. Before I get to what works, I'm going to first examine what doesn't. And even when I get to the solution for weight loss, which I firmly believe in, the solution isn't all that easy. It's doable, but it's hard. And it involves trade-offs. Is it worth it? I think so, but I'm not 100% certain. So let me introduce myself. I'm an American male in my 60s with no urgently serious health concerns that I'm aware of. A few years ago, I was obese, and I did have health concerns. I had high blood pressure, as well as high levels of cholesterol and triglycerides in my blood. Of particular concern to me, largely based on my family history, was my heart health and an elevated risk for developing diabetes and colorectal cancer, which are all statistically correlated with excess weight. My doctor recommends statins as a way to treat my elevated cholesterol. About 4.5 years ago, I started losing weight, and I am now about 40 pounds lighter. Without medication, I lowered my blood pressure and the levels of cholesterol and triglycerides in my blood, and am no longer considered pre-diabetic. I also no longer experience a host of other conditions that, as it turns out, were evidently related to excess weight, such as lower back pain and sleep deprivation. My current BMI, that's body mass index, a crude measure based on one's height and weight, suggests that I am marginally overweight. That's not great, I know. I can do better. But it's a great improvement over where I was. In fact, I recently gained about 15 pounds. I'll discuss why later. Since I mentioned BMI, allow me to go off on a brief tangent. Everyone acknowledges that the body mass index is an imperfect scale. For one thing, it doesn't measure how much of our weight is muscle and how much is fat. If you're a heavily muscled athlete or a bodybuilder, you might have relatively low body fat, but still be classified as overweight or even obese on the BMI scale, which would be seriously misleading. The BMI also doesn't take into account different body types. Some people are naturally broad, by which I mean they have wide shoulders and hips, and for such individuals, a higher BMI is to be expected without indicating that anything is amiss. Still, for most of us, the BMI can give us a general sense of how much excess fat we're carrying around and whether or not we need to do anything about it. When we set a target goal for ourselves, it should be largely based on our BMI. So the BMI is helpful because it is easily calculated and is broadly true. To dismiss it, as some do, because it is imperfect, it is simply foolish. For the sake of full disclosure, I'd like to mention my conflicts of interests. I have none. This video is not sponsored. I am not trying to sell any product or service. I have no incentive, financial or otherwise, in anything I might recommend. Why, then, am I doing this? Is it because I'm showing off? Maybe, but I'd rather think not. I believe I'm doing this because I'd like to help. I think I have some of the answers to a vexing problem that afflicts so many of us. I'm certainly not the only one with answers, but I'm hoping to lend my voice to the opinions of experts whom I do consider to be reputable and correct. In the past, I've learned so much from others who made documentaries or educational videos, many of them posted on YouTube, by the way, on a wide range of topics and issues, whether it's financial advice from The Plain Bagel or how to work my snowblower from Brad of Johnson's Small Engines. In short, I owe a lot to others who've helped me when I needed answers, and this is my way of giving back. That, anyway, is what I keep telling myself. But to be honest, there seems to be another ingredient here, which is that this is my opportunity to talk about something that has been a big concern of mine for the last few years. I've given this a lot of thought and research, and yet nobody's asked me about it, at least in ways that I thought really were inviting me to speak about it at length. So this is my opportunity to unload. I need to confess that I personally am not an expert, by which I mean that I am not a scientist or a physician. I have no specialized training in exercise or nutritional science, and I've never even written any articles on the topic or produced this kind of advice video before. In addition to my own experience and the advice of friends, I am borrowing from, if you can put on the first slide, and building upon, other experts whom I trust, more or less, such as Eric Berg, Jason Fung, and the late, great Sarah Halberg. I'm also indebted to the creators of the website Diet Doctor, Andreas Eenfeldt and Ted Naiman. By the way, thank you. You can take the screen off. But I personally am not an expert, which begs the question, why should you even bother listening to me? In other words, why do I deserve to have a seat at this table presenting my own notions of what works and what doesn't, when there are thousands of experts out there who have devoted their professional lives to these questions? And what can I possibly add to the equation? The answer has less to do with me and more with the poor quality of so much of what is out there. There are a lot of myths and misconceptions about weight loss, mostly peddled by experts who should know better. Yeah, I think I know better than most experts, at least, albeit not the ones I just mentioned. I respect them very much. Why is there so much misinformation? There are several reasons, and I'm going to discuss some of them in greater detail in a few minutes when I talk about exercise. But at this point, I'd like to note that it's really hard to conduct good science on human weight loss. People are different from each other, and our natural variability can determine not only if we're thick or thin to begin with, but also how we'll respond to different weight loss regimens. Beyond that, it's impossible to conduct the gold standard of scientific research, that is double-blind studies, on virtually any weight loss method because most studies cannot possibly be blind, that is, without the subject and the researcher knowing what they're doing. And weight loss studies have difficulty controlling for cheating or subjects dropping out or for any number of other factors that could skew the results. So most studies are merely observational and not based on proper scientific protocols. And it's up to an enterprising researcher to tease out a correlation, while controlling for any number of variables, and then theorize how a correlation can show a cause and effect relationship. And that means that even the science that there is prone to errors. Furthermore, some self-proclaimed experts tout products and programs that have absolutely no scientific basis in the first place. Often it's just to make a buck. Now, scientific study is based on two elements, theory and data. A scientist either starts off with a theory, they go gather data to see if it supports their theory, or they observe data and then try to come up with a theory to explain it. In either case, theory is an important part of the process. Sometimes good data is hard to come by. That was true, for instance, in the field of economics before the 1990s, and it's still true today in the field of nutrition science. And when good data is sparse, theory rules the roost, and many scientists spout theories which might make sense but are, in fact, not supported by good data. I'm not saying they're necessarily lying, I'm just that they're doing the best they can with limited data, and they're often wrong. People have been researching and writing about weight loss techniques for nearly 2 centuries, and there is still no general consensus. Some of the weight loss techniques out there are complete opposite of others. There is even a lack of good evidence for some basic questions involving nutrition, and the best scientific opinion changes regularly. A few examples. First, next slide, please. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's food pyramid, which represents the scientific consensus on what a healthy diet consists of, keeps changing every decade or so, and is currently under sharp attack from the acolytes of low-carb dieting. Thank you. Another example, the importance of breakfast. When I was younger and I wanted to lose weight, I would sometimes skip breakfast, since I found it relatively easy to extend my overnight fasting for a few more hours. But then I heard, consistently and from multiple reliable sources, that nutritionists proved that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and that not only do we function better after a good hearty breakfast, but that eating well in the morning can even help us lose weight. For many years, I accepted this hearty breakfast contention as established science, until more recently I read that it is flat wrong, that calories are calories whenever you consume them, and that it's actually even easier to burn more fat calories during a workout if done on an empty stomach. A third example relating to nutrition, but not specifically to weight loss, is a proper levels of vitamin D we should be seeing in our blood. I don't want to expound upon it here because it's not germane to my topic, but the science on this question has shifted back and forth in the last decade or so. Almost all scientists today are convinced that the vast majority of us don't need to be taking any vitamin D supplements, although many people, including my doctor, are not up to date on these findings. A fourth example, does just having extra muscle make it easier to lose weight? I've heard from several scientific sources a definitive yes, and from others a definitive no, and I'm still confused. Next slide, please. Remember the Woody Allen movie Sleeper from 1973? In it, the Woody Allen character wakes up 200 years in the future and finds that all the scientists are smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee, behaviors which he is told were once believed to be harmful, but are now appreciated as quite healthy. Now, this is a joke because when the movie was made, everyone was smoking and drinking coffee, even though we all knew that these habits were bad for us. Today, in 2024, we can still appreciate the joke about smoking. But coffee, what's wrong with that? These are just a few examples of how nutritional science is often uncertain and in flux, and illustrate why one should not place too much weight on the conventional wisdom. But the strongest argument against the conventional wisdom in nutrition is that whatever we're doing, it's not working. As a society, there are too many of us who are much too heavy, and this is taking a big toll on our collective health. It is my contention that if the nutrition experts all knew what they were doing, then we wouldn't be in such a mess. Rather, a good part of what we believe to be true is in fact a series of educated guesses, based not only on what scientists think they know to be true from their observations, but also what they assume should be true because it fits their preconceived patterns of whatever they believe in, or, to be brutally honest, because it conforms to what the food company that is sponsoring their particular research is out to prove. And that is why I believe that on this topic, there is not a significant advantage to the opinions of self-proclaimed experts over an intelligent amateur like me who aggregates the more convincing arguments and observations that I've heard and read. And one advantage that I do have over many of the experts in the field is my own experience with weight loss. I suspect that most of the people spewing advice have never really been fat to begin with. Okay, enough with introductory remarks, and now to the core question. What is the most effective strategy to lose weight? Almost all the weight loss experts, and certainly all that I've ever heard of until just a few years ago, say that in order to lose weight, you need to combine two elements: diet and exercise. For the most part, this is not true. I will address these two elements separately, beginning with the latter. Exercise. Contrary to the advice spewing experts, all the best scientific data, and there is reasonably good scientific data on this question, indicates that unless you're a professional athlete who engages in strenuous exercise many hours a day, exercise impacts weight loss in a very limited way, if at all. This might come as a huge surprise to many people, as it did to me when I first heard it, because we've so often been told otherwise. The people who tell you that you need to exercise in order to lose weight are friends, professional trainers, writers in magazines, media personalities, or YouTube influencers, and even many doctors. Mostly, they are not the true experts on the subject. They're not the scientists. They're conveying secondhand information that is based on conventional wisdom. On the other hand, the scientists who have actually studied the field have concluded overwhelmingly that exercise is not an important part of the equation. It might help you lose a little weight, but not very much. My own personal observations are a little different. I found that exercise does have an impact on my weight. Specifically, I gain it, although admittedly not very much. Let me repeat that in case you weren't paying enough attention. When I exercise, I gain weight. Why? Why should I gain weight when I exercise? How could that be? Well, when I first noticed the trend, I had three theories to explain it. One is that my experience with exercise leading to weight gain might be a statistical fluke. So if it's not representative of the norm, then forget about it. It's not really important. A second theory is a little dark. Maybe weight gain really is the norm, but scientists had been fudging their data because they simply could not entertain the possibility that exercise could lead to weight gain, since it is so contrary to conventional weight loss theory. A third possibility, which is my personal favorite, was that I was gaining weight because I was gaining muscle, which is not a bad thing after all, especially if, as I believed at the time, just having extra muscle mass will help you burn additional calories. By the way, that last bit, muscle mass burns calories because it is, quote-unquote, metabolically active, is probably not true, although I still hear it regularly. Those were my original thoughts when I first noticed this tendency that I gain weight when I exercise, but since that time, I've heard other explanatory theories from popular science sources. First, the amount of calories that we burn in a typical workout is insignificant relative to the amount of calories in the typical foods we eat. And there are other factors in weight loss, such as hormonal ones, that far outweigh the importance of how much we might move our bodies. Beyond that, it has been suggested that after we exercise, we often reward ourselves with food. And by doing so, we offset any weight gain, any weight loss we might have experienced from burning all those calories while exercising. In other words, you work out at the gym strenuously for an hour, then you have a latte or a muffin, and poof, you've got a significant net gain in calories. By the way, none of the theories I've just mentioned contradict each other. I haven't ruled out any of them, so they might all be true. That's the bad news. Exercise will not help you lose weight. But look at the bright side. You don't really need to exercise in order to lose weight. Human bodies, after all, expend a fair amount of energy just to maintain homeostasis. In a human body at rest, the organ that consumes the largest amount of calories is, by far, the brain. You don't need to work at that. If you do nothing, if you sleep all day, you will be burning up calories merely by existence. Thank goodness for all those large calorie-consuming brains. For our ancestors, who often struggled to consume enough daily calories to simply maintain themselves, that was a problem that needed to be overcome. But for those of us today trying to lose weight, isn't that a glorious thing? So if I'm correct that exercise has little impact on weight loss, why do the experts, at least the experts you're likely to encounter at a gym, at the doctor's office, on TV or radio, or in the pages of a magazine, tell us otherwise all the time? I can't answer that question definitively, but I have 7 complementary theories. When I say complementary, I mean that the theories complement rather than conflict with each other. And I personally believe that all 7 are true. First of all, as I noted earlier, there is a problem with nutritional science generally. The science that there isn't very rigorous. It's plagued with statistical and systemic shortcomings, and it's often contradictory. Consequently, scientific findings in this field are more likely to be dismissed, and the experts can cherry-pick the studies that support their own theories and preconceived notions. Even meta-analyses are often flawed because the types of studies that are published are skewed. There are so many studies sponsored by food, beverage, and pharmaceutical companies with a direct stake in the conclusions, and many of the better scientific studies aren't even published to begin with because no one has enough interest in publishing them. This is an important topic that deserves a deeper dive, but I don't have the time and space here, so I'm just moving on. Second, diet together with exercise has long been the standard treatment for obesity, and some people have successfully lost weight this way. So it's natural to assume that exercise must be part of the time-proven remedy. But natural assumptions are not necessarily correct, and, at the risk of stating the obvious, correlation does not prove causality. In other words, people who have lost weight with diet and exercise might have done so because of the dietary changes, while the exercise regimen has just gone along for the ride without contributing at all to the weight loss. Allow me to go off on a tangent for a moment, because it's very important to understand this last point, the difference between correlation and causality. Correlation means that 2 phenomena appear together. Causality means that one of those phenomena causes the other. Correlation is an objective statistical observation. Causality is achieved when we insert our own theory as to how one of those data points leads to the other. So, for example, when I was young, I was slim and I had a full head of hair, believe it or not. Eventually, I started losing my hair, and then I got fat. So, did my baldness cause weight gain? Maybe. I can't prove it didn't, but I've never heard anybody make such a ridiculous claim. Instead, it's assumed that both conditions are largely dependent on advancing age, but are otherwise independent of each other. Even though baldness and weight gain are correlated statistically, it's presumed that there is no causal link between the two. That is, one does not cause the other. Another example, 20 years ago, health experts assumed that high cholesterol, specifically the LDL, low-density lipoprotein type, causes heart disease. We were encouraged to avoid foods that are high in dietary cholesterol, like eggs and red meat. Many experts still believe this, and I'll concede it might be true. But there are 2 logical leaps in this way of thinking. First, it's not at all clear that if you eat food with a lot of LDL cholesterol in it, you'll also have high levels of LDL cholesterol in your blood. After all, the cholesterol you eat needs to be broken down in your gut before it enters your bloodstream. And your body has mechanisms to control the levels of cholesterol in your bloodstream. Second, and this is a point I want to stress here, while high levels of blood LDL cholesterol are associated with heart disease, it's not at all clear that they cause it. It's quite possible that high blood cholesterol is a symptom, not a cause, of heart disease. And both are the result of some as yet unidentified factor. So just as me getting hair plugs or a toupee is not going to make me any slimmer, it's possible that lowering cholesterol alone won't alleviate the risk for heart disease. I've heard that statins, which lower cholesterol, have been proven to be very effective at lowering LDL cholesterol, but haven't done anything to lower mortality rates, which suggests that LDL cholesterol does not raise the risk of mortality. This debate is not yet resolved. Next slide, please. Not long ago, I read a wonderful book, Calling Bullshit, I hope I'm allowed to say that, by Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West. It's an easy, entertaining read. It's chock full of the kind of analyses and knowledge, such as basic statistics, that I've always argued everyone should be fluent in. It doesn't deal directly with nutritional science, but confirms many of my own beliefs. It certainly stresses this distinction between correlation and causality, and it suggests we adopt a more nuanced approach to scientific studies. I recommend it heartily. Calling Bullshit by Bergstrom and West. Now back to the question of why so many experts tell us that we can lose weight through exercise. My third theory is that most of these experts aren't lying to us. Rather, they are honestly mistaken. They simply don't know the truth themselves. After all, if an untruth is repeated often enough, it enters the realm of general knowledge and is more likely to be repeated again and again, even by presumed experts. Remember how in 2016, Hillary Clinton was mortally ill and had only a few months left to live? Well, you got to admit that she recovered remarkably well. It seems that oft-repeated truisms aren't always so reliable. Fourth is another reason why exercise myth is so prevalent. Exercise might be beneficial to our general health, even if it doesn't impact weight loss specifically. Since many of us are primarily concerned with our weight, even while we are less concerned with our heart rate or bilirubin levels or whatnot, some of the experts might be misleading us about weight loss in order to encourage us to engage in beneficial activities, even those activities that won't necessarily help us lose weight. Fifth, the exercise myth is a natural outgrowth, one might say the flip side, of the theory behind the dominant low-calorie diet. The theory is that if you burn more calories than you ingest, then you will lose weight. So it follows that you can lose even more weight if you burn more calories through exercise. Calories in, calories out. It sounds very reasonable, and it's not entirely wrong, but it's very misleading. And I'll discuss the flaws in this theory a little bit later. Sixth, there is a lot of money behind the exercise myth, coming primarily from the food and beverage industries. Food and beverage producers support and promote directly or indirectly a huge number of non-rigorous or misleadingly designed weight loss studies, and also engage in a lot of advertising and lobbying that often distorts or misrepresents the truth. The motivation of these liars in the food and beverage industry is to convince the public and governments that the reason we are fat is all because of our lack of exercise and is not related in any way to the food and beverage industry itself or to the lax governmental regulations that oversee it. Needless to say, nobody in the booming gym industry either has an incentive to contradict this international cabal of deceit. As in many cases of false narratives, if you want to understand why a lie is so widely perceived to be true, you need to follow the money to understand the incentives of those who are promoting the lie in the first place. Now, some of you may be hearing this and saying to yourself, whoa, conspiracy theories? What's next? Flat Earth, UFOs, the big steal. Let me clarify. I do believe in some conspiracy theories, but no, not all are created equal. When it comes to nutrition and health, I do indeed believe that the CBA, the Consumer Brands Association, previously known as the GMA, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, as well as the ILSI, the International Life Sciences Institute, and many other national and international food industry consortia do not have our best interests at heart. And why should they? Their business is to promote their own products and brands. Some people are angry that the tobacco companies worked so hard for so many years to conceal the fact that smoking is bad for you. I say, what did you expect? It's their business. That doesn't make them necessarily evil, but it does mean that we should be aware how their incentives often don't align with ours, particularly since food and beverage industries are profoundly influential in determining government policy. Agricultural subsidies, the USDA food pyramid, governmental oversight bodies, and a large host of other issues. And the government, together with these consortia and all those companies selling us food, beverages, nutritional supplements, and gym memberships, indirectly affect our own widely held beliefs about nutrition, exercise, and weight loss. And finally, my seventh and last theory to explain the persistence of the exercise for weight loss myth is that there is a natural human tendency to view bad outcomes in moral terms. What I mean by that is that whenever something goes wrong, we naturally look for a culprit to blame. Often, the easiest to find culprit is the very victim of the bad outcome, on the theory that somehow they were guilty in bringing misfortune upon themselves, right? Excessive weight loss is no exception to this rule. We believe that we're fat because we're not doing what we should be doing. Now, this mindset is particularly convincing when we apply it not to ourselves, but to others, right? All those fat bastards out there, they're fat because they're lazy bums. And they could lose weight if only they applied themselves and tried hard enough. I believe that this thought process is a major factor in fat shaming. The exercise myth fits perfectly into this narrative. After all, exercise involves hard work and sweat. Do it, and you won't be fat. Yeah, I wish it worked that way, but it doesn't. Exercise won't make you thin. The exercise myth is deeply ingrained in our psyches. I'll illustrate with an example. Some time ago, I read an interview in Blue Zones that Dan Buettner conducted with Dr. Michael Osterholm, a leading epidemiologist, about the COVID-19 pandemic. The full interview was preceded by highlights, which included the following bullet point. If you're under age 55, obesity is the #1 risk factor for COVID. So eating the right diet, getting physical activity, and managing stress are some of the most important things you can do to protect yourself from the disease. I thought to myself, I guess Dr. Osterholm believes that physical activity can help reduce obesity. Even though obesity is not his field of expertise, he is a medical expert I respect. So, do I need to reconsider my position? The funny thing is, after reading the full interview, I saw that Dr. Osterholm never said that. What he did say, after noting that obesity is the #1 risk factor among people under 55 for developing severe complications from COVID, is that healthy lifestyles are so important to reduce the risk of COVID. But he never even linked healthy lifestyles directly to obesity, and physical activity was only mentioned in the context of how fresh air can dissipate the coronavirus aerosols. The doctor never once linked physical activity to obesity. In other words, the bullet point misrepresented the actual interview. So if the good doctor never said it, where did that misleading bullet point come from? I'm guessing that it was an unintentional inclusion by an editor who subconsciously presumed that it had been said. I mean, if obesity is so dangerous, why wouldn't it follow, the editor probably reasoned, that the best way to reduce the risk of COVID is diet and exercise, which, as we all know, is the best way to cure obesity? The answer is no, because it's not, and the doctor never said it. But we all think that it is. Now, this presentation is about weight loss as a goal, but as long as I've mentioned it, I feel that I should say a few more words about exercise. There are benefits to be had from exercise, and you've probably heard this enough times that you don't need me to tell you this. Most of us would probably be healthier if we exercised more. So if you're looking to lose weight, it's reasonable to ask yourself why. And if your ultimate goal is to be healthy, then exercise might indeed be a legitimate part of that lifestyle you should consider. But if you're concerned only with weight loss, then you can probably forget about the exercise element. Many experts, such as Dr. Yoni Freedhoff and the other scientists who developed the Edmonton obesity staging system, have argued that being fit is much more important to an individual's health and well-being than how heavy they are. More recently, I've heard that a wide-ranging review of weight-centered versus weight-neutral approaches to health, led by Professor Glenn Gaser of Arizona State University, concluded that if people increase physical activity or fitness, their mortality rate goes down by 40 to 60%. Wow. But with weight loss alone, the risk is reduced by 20% at most, if at all. I've heard about this from secondary sources without having looked at the research myself, but I'm assuming that a lot would depend on particulars. How much excess weight are we talking about? How much one condition is dependent on the other? And how fitness is defined. For example, if fitness is defined broadly as being in good health, then of course people who are healthy but not slim are healthier than people who are slim but not healthy. On the other hand, if fitness is defined narrowly by how much one exercises, is able to bench press, or as a function of lung capacity, then I'm skeptical. Personally, I suspect that, contrary to the studies I've just mentioned, obesity is a stronger predictor than low fitness of poor health outcomes. First of all, as I stated in the beginning of this video, there is a huge trove of data suggesting that being seriously overweight is bad for you. And this is borne out by my own personal experience. When I was heavier, I used to exercise. I was stronger, with better muscle tone, and I was probably able to run better, and certainly I was younger. But I gradually developed numerous medical concerns. Around the time I stopped exercising, I also started losing weight. And I seem to be healthier today, in many respects. And I'm beginning to also wonder whether this emphasis on fitness is influenced by the fact that exercise is very much in vogue these days, and if this might not be a passing fad. Still, I need to qualify my own opinion here. Many health experts argue strenuously against my point of view, and I'm not willing to go out on a limb to defend my own point of view, so I'll concede that I might be wrong. But even if I'm wrong about the relative importance of fitness, I am convinced that obesity does have, indeed, many serious health consequences. Remember that the old conventional wisdom, supported by a wealth of data, was that our health is hugely impacted by our weight, and you can't dismiss all those studies willy-nilly with a handful of new studies arguing that it's okay to be obese as long as you're fit, or a change in popular culture that perceives fat as beautiful. And there are new studies that are still coming out which point to poor health outcomes linked to excess body fat, including heightened susceptibility to developing long COVID, which, by the way, terrifies me, and how inflammation, which is a natural bodily response to infection and disease, can be much more harmful and sometimes even fatal to obese people. If you're fat and it hurts you to hear this, I'm sorry to be hurting you. I mean that. I care about people's feelings. But sometimes things need to be said even if they're hurtful. I sincerely hope that my words can encourage some people to lead more healthy lives, which might outweigh the pain that I'm causing by talking about it. Remember, we all suffer from confirmation bias, which applies not only to our tendency to hear what confirms what we believe in, or at least want to believe in, but also what kinds of experts and studies are going to get played up in mass media in the first place. In other words, since so many of us are obese, we would like to believe that fat is beautiful and that obesity is not dangerous. So that is what we are more likely to end up hearing and believing. And any expert who says just that is going to get more airtime. Of course, even as I'm making these arguments, I have to be aware of my own confirmation bias. So it pains me to say this, but I'll have to admit, I've always hated exercising. So maybe it's my own confirmation bias. Another thing to note about exercise, it can hurt you. I'm not even talking about professional athletes in contact sports who regularly sustain concussions and consequently develop traumatic brain injury or early onset dementia. Nor am I talking about second-tier athletes who destroy their knees or backs playing high school or college ball. I'm talking about normal sedentary people who break their legs skiing, crack their bones biking, suffer heart attacks jogging, drown while swimming, get concussions or torn ligaments while playing casual basketball, tennis, or pickleball, or develop arthritis or muscular injuries from mild, low-impact exercise in the gym. Personally, I suffer from tendinitis in one of my shoulders and both of my knees, conditions that were pretty clearly caused by exercise. I've slowly but gradually recovered to a large extent after I stopped exercising and paid more attention to stretching. I don't think I'm unusual. On the contrary, I consider myself lucky to have suffered nothing much worse than tendinitis. I know several people who've been seriously hurt and others who've died from exercise. By the way, I want to point out that the woman in the, I don't know if she's exercising or stretching. I suspect that the woman in the picture here is stretching before exercise. So when it comes to stretching, good for her. When it comes to exercise, maybe take it easy if you're just trying to lose weight. Thank you. So much for exercise. Before I turn my attention to diet, which will be the main focus of my presentation, I want to briefly allude to a few other methods to control our bulging waistlines. First, surgery. I have no first-hand knowledge of this, so I don't consider myself qualified to offer advice on this topic. Gastric or bariatric surgery is a drastic, life-altering procedure that entails serious costs and risks. I think that liposuction has largely fallen out of favor, but different forms of bariatric surgery have shown significant success on many severely obese individuals. Not on everyone, though. If you are severely obese and are considering surgery, I say this with all seriousness, please go research this option somewhere else. Second, drugs and nutritional supplements. In the past, I believed that most of these didn't work, are expensive, or have numerous side effects. But I'm not an expert. I believe that better information was available on the website dietdoctor.com, which I trust since so much else of what they say is sensible. My own personal inclination is to take as few drugs and medications as possible, except when absolutely necessary. By the way, I am a fan of vaccines. More recently, GLP-1 agonists have come on the market, drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro, that have been shown to be effective, quite effective, in weight loss. I have no special knowledge of these drugs, their effectiveness, their side effects, and costs, so I'm going to shut up. Please research this information elsewhere. Third, let me preface by saying that I do not recommend the following method, nor have I ever seen anyone suggesting it for weight loss, but I'm convinced that it works. Smoking. have you ever noticed that cigarette smokers are rarely fat and that people who tend to quit tend to gain a lot of weight? I have a few theories as to why this is so. First, because some ingredients in tobacco, such as nicotine, might increase our metabolism rate or slow down our body's absorption of nutrients, and in that way, keep our weight gain in check. Second, because many of us have an oral fixation, and when people are smoking, they're putting stuff in their mouths other than food, so that's helpful. Smoking might also assist diets by damaging our taste buds and thereby making food less appealing to us. Again, I want to stress that I do not recommend smoking because the health effects are serious and long-lasting, and quitting smoking might be even harder to do than dieting. But smoking, besides, smoking these days, at least around here where I live, is really expensive, and I'm a cheap bastard. Maybe I should have said that when I introduced myself. While I've mentioned smoking, worth giving a shout out to another method, let's call it method 3.5, cocaine. Fortunately, I have no experience or special knowledge about this, but my understanding is that many cocaine abusers tend to lose weight over time. Maybe meth too. Again, I don't advise it. Fourth, you can put another slide on. There is another method that was disclosed by former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie in his book, Let Me Finish. Governor Christie, who headed President Trump's transition team in 2016-2017, writes that Trump told him to wear his ties long, extending to below the belt line, since this has a slimming effect. So you might want to try this out for a while and see if it helps you shed a few pounds. But the quickest and most dramatic method is the one I call SIG. That's SIYG. This is one of the most important techniques used by so many weight loss programs you've seen advertised on magazines and on TV, where they show before and after photos of the same individual. Next slide, please. It's also practiced routinely by men on the beach when they see a pretty woman walk by. SIG is an acronym for suck in your gut. It might be short-lived, but it is damn effective. Okay, thank you. Back to seriousness, I want to briefly touch on another rather sensitive side topic, fat shaming, or calling out people for being fat. Why do we do this? It is certainly hurtful for the fat person. Is the person doing the fat shaming doing it for their own selfish or malevolent reasons? Or are they trying to help by encouraging the fat person to lose weight? I've heard that studies have shown that fat shaming is counterproductive because it can actually lead fat people to gain even more weight for complicated reasons I won't go into here. However, I'm inclined to take these reports with a grain of salt because there is such a strong incentive for fat people and their allies to promote these theories. Furthermore, I've also heard from one researcher that fat shaming might be beneficial. A friend of mine, Jonathan Engel, wrote a book entitled Fat Nation, A History of Obesity in America, in which he asked why we are so fat. He examined other relatively thin societies, but most of these, like South Korea or Norway, differ from us in important structural ways. The society that is most comparable to the US, except for their relatively low rates of obesity, is France. Why the obesity difference? One possible explanation is that in France, unlike the US, there is a strong culture of fat shaming. So does fat shaming hurt or help? I don't know. For any researcher who wants to study this question more closely, let me put forward an idea which should be kind of obvious. If we want to assess the effects of fat shaming on obesity, we need to measure its impact not just on fat people themselves, but also on people who once were fat and on people who might have otherwise become fat. What I mean by this is that if fat shaming becomes the norm in a society, maybe fat people suffer shame and humiliation with no benefit, while other people work harder to avoid becoming fat and thus benefit indirectly. Personally, I've gotten occasional taunts from some family members when I was fat, these were hurtful, and I don't think they were helpful. But when doctors told me I needed to lose weight, I was more inclined to listen. In retrospect, before I heard it from doctors, I had largely been in denial. I thought that my weight was basically okay. Why then did I look in photos as if I were pushing out my belly? Poor photography taken from the wrong angle. Why were my clothes gradually shrinking on me? Damn fabrics. Ultimately, when I could no longer ignore the evidence any longer, I took a hard look at myself and did my own fat shaming. To myself, alone, in the privacy of my own home. I won't repeat the language that was used. Then I started to lose weight. Would this work for everyone? I don't know. So thank you very much. This really, I kind of went over time. I do have more to say on the topic. I've told a lot of what doesn't work. I'd like to continue and talk about diet. What type of diet would work? So for that, I'll have to continue in the next video, and I guess we're going to put this out a little bit later. I want to thank very much Mike Gecht, who put me on this show. I want to thank the studios, and this has been really my first opportunity to do this sort of thing. And I hope to see you again in my next video. Thank you.